Today we will continue listening to God's story, and we are working with the book of Judges. It's the fourth sermon on this book, which is the seventh book of the Bible, and today's portion is the book of Judges, chapter 10, 11, and 12. 3 chapters. The title for my sermon is God's Story, Jephthah. Jephthah. Let's dive into the story. First, the background. Judges chapter 10, verses 6 through 9. The people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and served the Baals and the Ashtaroth, the gods of Syria, the gods of Sidon, the gods of Moab, the gods of the Ammonites, and the gods of the Philistines. And they forsook the Lord and did not serve him. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of the Philistines and into the hand of the Ammonites. And they crushed and oppressed the people of Israel that year. For 18 years they oppressed all the people of Israel who were beyond the Jordan in the land of the Amorites, which is in Gilead. And the Ammonites crossed the Jordan to fight also against Judah and against Benjamin and against the house of Ephraim, so that Israel was severely distressed. Does it sound familiar? It's the 10th chapter of the book of Judges, and the same thing is happening all over again. People of God begin worshiping deities of the surrounding nations. And there is a list, about 7 of them just in this story. They are worshiping the demons, the pagan deities, and forsaking the Lord. And when that happens, God is no longer able to protect them, to guide them, to bless them. This is what's happening. The book of Psalms, chapter 81, verses 11 and 12. But my people did not listen to my voice. Israel would not submit to me, so I gave them over to their stubborn hearts to follow their own counsels. God withdraws himself. He says, let you be. Do your own thing. If you don't want me in your life, you are on your own now. And when God withdraws, it's now the harsh reality. There are enemies. There are military campaigns. There are problems. The world around us is not too of a hospitable place. So the reality kicks in. I gave them over to their stubborn hearts to follow their own counsel, and now enemies. What are they doing? There are some strong words used here. Verse number 8, Judges 10:8. They crushed and oppressed the people of Israel. Verse 9, the end. So that Israel was severely distressed. The life without God could be very appealing from distance. But when you begin experiencing the life without God, when you are on your own, it's very hard. Severely distressed. So what do people do when for 18 years they are being pushed and tossed around by the enemy? Let's continue reading, chapter 10, verses 10 through 16. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. Again, same story. This verb has been used a number of times already in the book of Judges. But up to this moment, nowhere was it explained. What does it mean to cry out to the Lord? We kind of assumed what it means. But this is the first chapter, the first time in the book of Judges that spells it out. Let's see what it means. What does it mean to cry out? What does it entail? It says, they cried out to the Lord, saying, we have sinned against you, because we have forsaken our God and have served the Baals. That's verse 10. What does it mean to cry out? Who is crying out? What is required to be able to cry out to the Lord? First, what do? They admit. Very important. There is an admission of guilt. And then let's go to verse 15. And the people of Israel said to the Lord, we have sinned. Again, the same statement. They acknowledge their gift. And then they go further. Do to us whatever seems good to you. Only please deliver us this day. This is a very important detail. A person who is truly penitent, a person who is truly admitting his or her fault, doesn't hold to any conditions. I'm at your mercy, Lord. Very often people say, yes, I am wrong, but, or I will admit if she admits it as well, and you name it. So there are conditions. I'll do if true repentance doesn't have any conditions. They say, do to us whatever seems good to you, God. Giving yourself totally to the mercy of God. This is what it means to cry out. This is what is required to cry out. Now let's go to verse 16. It says, so they put away the foreign gods from among them and served the Lord. They don't only say the right things. We admit the guilt, forgive us, we have sinned, do anything you want, but they actually change their life. It says they put away the foreign gods. It means they stopped heathen pagan worship. They stopped doing the lawless, abominable things before the Lord. Their life changed. They began serving the Lord, doing what He requires. So this is what it takes to be able to cry out. This is the first explanation. This is what takes place. Now, what's God's response? What's God's reaction to what people say and do in this story? Let's read verses 11 and 12. And the Lord said to the people of Israel, did I not save you from the Egyptians and from the Amorites, from the Ammonites, and from the Philistines, the Sidonians also, and the Amalekites and the Maonites oppressed you, and you cried out to me, and I saved you out of their hand. God offers the basic explanation of what has been taking place. He says, just recall how many times you were oppressed by this enemy and that neighboring nation and this one. And each time that you have cried out, each time I saved you. So God recalls the story of oppression and salvation, and then He does something funny. Verses 13 and 14. Yet you have forsaken me and served other gods. Therefore, I will save you no more. Go and cry out to the gods whom you have chosen. Let them save you in the time of your distress. Does it sound logical? Yeah, I mean, you have abandoned me. You chose other gods. Use them, right? Why me now? So he offers to use the services of those gods to whom the people served, whom they offered sacrifices to, brought their money, danced to, and worshipped. Isn't it logical that those deities should now step in and offer help? After saying this, he hears the reply of the people, and we already read this. They say, "Do to us whatever seems good to you." And then verse 16 says, he became impatient over the misery of Israel. It's a very peculiar phrase. God became impatient over the misery of Israel. What does it mean? New International Version says this, and he could bear Israel's misery no longer. I mean, these are his children. Rebellious, lawless, backsliders. But still, when they admit, when they realize, when they stopped worshiping other gods, when they give themselves to the mercy of God, he just can't stand seeing their misery. And out of pity, out of, he says, he could not bear Israel's misery any longer, and he steps in. So all of this was a backstory, but very important lessons. It is impossible to genuinely cry out to the Lord when you are still doing the worshiping of idols, when you are still persisting, when you need God only for His help, right? And other times you continue with your life the way that you like it. It is impossible because there are consequences. The spiritual realm is governed by the same cause and effect law that's material realm. So a change needs to take place. And when they do cry out, when they do acknowledge, when they do stop sinning, when they submit their fate to God, He can't stand seeing their misery any longer. Let's continue reading. Book of Judges, chapter 10, verses 17 and 18. Then the Ammonites were called to arm, and they encamped in Gilead, and the people of Israel came together, and they encamped at Mizpah. And the people, the leaders of Gilead, said one to another, "Who is the man who will begin to fight against the Ammonites? He shall be head over all the inhabitants of Gilead." So 2 armies have been summoned. They are ready to fight, but there is a problem. Israel doesn't have a military commander. It's interesting to note that it says that the leaders of Gilead came together and they were talking to one another. Will you go? Will you go? No, thank you. I am with you, but not me, right? I won't be the leader. So there is a leadership crisis. They don't have anyone who would be willing to step up and assume this role, though they are offering for the person to be not only a military commander, but also he shall be head over all the inhabitants of Gilead. So he'll be a civil head, civil leader as well. So with this question, chapter 10 ends, and now we're wondering, who will step up? Who will be the deliverer? We've seen many deliverers already in the book of Judges. Who will God use this time? Are you curious? Let's find out. Chapter 11. Judges chapter 11, first 3 verses. Now Jephthah, the Gileadite, was a mighty warrior, but he was the son of a prostitute. Gilead was the father of Jephthah, and Gilead's wife also bore him sons. And when his wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephthah out and said to him, "You shall not have an inheritance in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman." Then Jephthah fled from the brothers and lived in the land of Tob, and worthless fellows collected around Jephthah and went out with him. Okay, let's collect the data. What do we know about the person? How would you characterize his origin? A shameful one. He was born from a prostitute. That's the first fact. And we see how it plays out in his life further. What else do we know? It says that, verse number 2, after he was born, Gilead's wife also bore him sons. So there was another woman, and she had sons also, younger brothers of Jephthah by his father. Different mothers, one father. So what took place? It says, when they grew up, they drove Jephthah out and said to him, "You shall not receive any inheritance from our father." So he was the firstborn, and he was acknowledged as a son. He lived in the family. And while the boys were younger, they did not raise their voices, but now they felt that they have enough power to do what they want. Now, how would you characterize what was done to Jephthah, the firstborn of Gilead? What words come to your mind? Not fair, injustice, right? Do you remember the law about the firstborn? The book of Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 15 through 17. If a man has two wives, and the one loved and the other unloved, and both the loved and the unloved have borne him children, and if the firstborn son belongs to the unloved, then on the day when he assigns his possessions as an inheritance to his sons, he may not treat the son of the loved as the firstborn in preference to the son of the unloved, who is the firstborn. But he shall acknowledge the firstborn, the son of the unloved, by giving him a double portion of all that he has, for he is the firstfruits of his strength. The right of the firstborn is his. So Jephthah was supposed to get twice as much as all other sons. Instead, he receives nothing. He is expelled. He is driven out. Injustice. Moreover, verse number 3 says the following. Then Jephthah fled from his brothers. What gives the reason to flee? When there is danger. He didn't just leave. He fled. He had to flee. So apparently, in addition to the injustice with this inheritance and his portion and such, there was some kind of a physical danger. He had to flee for his life. So try to picture this person, born of a prostitute, treated during his childhood differently. When there was a chance, he was robbed of his rightful place and money and inheritance. He flees. There is this physical danger. So this is his life. What do people usually do being in such a condition? They do what he did. It says, worthless fellows collected around Jephthah and went out with him. We call it bad company, gangs. And since he was strong, he became their leader of this group. And different versions play with this word, worthless fellows, right? Literally, it means empty. So these are the kind of people that surrounded Jephthah. So he became a robber. He became a leader of this gang of robbers. So, and we are curious what this person could be good for. This kind of person, with his origin, with his grievances, with what he's doing right now. Is he good for anything? I believe that's the main story. That's the main message in the story of Jephthah. Unfortunately, people want to know more about the vow that he did give. And we will talk about it as well. But the main thing is, and the main question is, will God be able to use someone like him? Let's continue reading. Judges chapter 11, verses 4 through 11. After a time, the Ammonites made war against Israel. And when the Ammonites made war against Israel, the elders of Gilead went to bring Jephthah from the land of Tob. And they said to Jephthah, "Come and be our leader, that we may fight against the Ammonites." But Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, "Did you not hate me and drive me out of my father's house? Why have you come to me now when you are in distress?" So we'll learn something else. It wasn't only his half-brothers that did this. The case of inheritance was heard by the city council. The elders had their voice there, and they sided with injustice. They hated him and drove him out. So he does have this resentment. He is offended, and he just brings this out. They give their response. The elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, verse 8, "That is why we have come. We have turned to you now, that you may go with us and fight against the Ammonites and be our head over all the inhabitants of Gilead." So again, they are offering two positions, a military leader and a ruler over the land. Now, verse 9, Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, "If you bring me home again to fight against the Ammonites, and the Lord gives them over to me, I will be your head." What he says is very telling. Despite his misfortunes, despite being wronged in life, he has kept his faith in God. He understands this phrase, this statement is very telling. If the Lord gives them over to me, he understands that it would be God who would bring the victory if he decides to do so. So he is a believer. He has kept his faith despite the trials. Now, verse 11, so Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and leader over them. And Jephthah spoke all his words before the Lord at Mizpah. What else do we see here? About his faith and his relationship with God. It's not only a civil contract between him and the elders. He invokes God. In the presence, all his words before the Lord. So this was some kind of a religious, spiritual ceremony that was done. Let's continue reading Judges chapter 11, verses 12 through 28. For the sake of time, I'll just read a couple of verses. Then Jephthah sent messengers to the king of Ammonites and said, what do you have against me, that you have come to me to fight against my land? And the king of the Ammonites answered the messengers of Jephthah, because Israel, on coming up from Egypt, took away my land, from the Arnon to the Jabbok and to the Jordan. Now therefore restore it peaceably. Jephthah again sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites and said to him. So what does he do? He is trying diplomacy. You see, armies are already there, ready to fight. But first he sends messengers. He sends his emissaries twice. He's trying to reason, to find out what could be done to avoid the war. And when he is replying to the messengers, he shows his thorough knowledge of the sacred history. There is this accusation that Israel supposedly unjustly took some land from the Ammonites. And he says, no, that's not what happened. This is what happened. So if you read this on your own, you will see that he is vividly, specifically, and very accurately telling the story of how it really played out. And in retelling that story, he acknowledges that it was God who did something. Again, very important aspect of his worldview and his personality. So he is recalling God's actions in history. He's trying to solve this territorial dispute by appealing to history. But unfortunately, the Ammonites, they have an alternative version of history. Something that comes to mind when I'm analyzing what happens in my homeland now, the alternative version of history. People tend to rewrite history to their advantage. And this is what Ammonites try to do. But Jephthah says, no, guys, we have been here for 300 years already. And this is how we came to be here. So he knows his history, he knows God's actions, he acknowledges God's actions, and this is what he finishes his address with. Verses 27. I therefore have not sinned against you, verse 27, and you do me wrong by making war on me. The Lord, the judge, decide this day between the people of Israel and the people of Ammon. So when there was no agreement, when diplomacy didn't work, he invokes God. He calls on God to be the judge between the Israelites and the Ammonites. What happens next? Verses 29, 32, and 33. Then the Spirit of the Lord was upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh, and passed on to Mizpah of Gilead, and from Mizpah of Gilead he passed on to the Ammonites. Verse 32, so Jephthah crossed over to the Ammonites to fight against them, and the Lord gave them into his hand. And he struck them from Aroer to the neighborhood of Minnith, 20 cities, as far as Abel Keramim, with a great blow. So the Ammonites were subdued before the people of Israel. The Spirit of the Lord comes on Jephthah. And with this power, he wins the war. He conquers 20 cities. And the Lord is victorious. So to the question of, will this kind of a person be of any use? When all the nobles, when all the princes, when all the leaders were not willing to step up, God shows his impartiality. He doesn't care about the origin, about the status, about the mistreatments, or even about the fact that he was a robber. When Jephthah chooses the Lord, when he is acting out of his faith, God is able to use him to accomplish his mission. And he becomes one of the saviors of Israel, and there is victory. That's the main message of the passage. That's the main lesson. It doesn't matter how low the person is viewed in the society. Trust in God, faith in him, brings the victory. God was able to use this person. Now about the vow. About the vow. Unfortunately, as I already mentioned, most people kind of glance over the main message and concentrate on the vow that Jephthah gave. What is it about? Let's read. Judges chapter 11, verses 30-31. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will give the Ammonites into my hand, then whatever comes out from the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the Ammonites shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. That's the vow. Verses 34-40. Then Jephthah came to his home at Mizpah, and behold, his daughter came out to meet him with tambourines and with dances. She was his only child. Besides her, he had neither son nor daughter. And as soon as he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, my daughter, you have brought me very low, and you have become the cause of great trouble to me. For I have opened my mouth to the Lord, and I cannot take back my vow. And she said to him, my father, you have opened your mouth to the Lord. Do to me according to what has gone out of your mouth. Now that the Lord has avenged you on your enemies, on the Ammonites. So she said to her father, let this thing be done to me. Leave me alone 2 months, that I may go up and down on the mountains and weep for my virginity, I and my companions. So he said, go. Then he sent her away for 2 months, and she departed, she and her companions, and wept for her virginity on the mountains. And at the end of the 2 months, she returned to her father, who did with her according to his vow that he had made. She had never known a man, and it became a custom in Israel that the daughters of Israel went year by year to lament the daughter of Jephthah, the Gileadite, 4 days in the year. So the main question is, what happened? What happened? This is one of the stories that critics love a lot. Let's try to collect the data from the passage to understand what really transpired. First, did you get what was the condition of Jephthah when he made the vow? Judges 11:29. Then the Spirit of the Lord was upon Jephthah, and he passed and went and crossed and gave a vow. First fact, very important fact, verse 30. 29 and 30 show that he gave the vow when the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. So it wasn't his invention, it wasn't his idea, he was an instrument. He did all those things because the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. That's fact number one. Fact number two. What was the vow that he gave? Let's go to verse 31. Whatever comes out from the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the Ammonites shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. There is one short word that's very significant. The word "and." So it shall be the Lord's, it will belong to the Lord, and I will sacrifice it, right? But when you look at other versions, instead of "and," you see different words. For example, Young's literal translation, like word for word translation, says, "Or I have offered it up for it a burnt offering." There is a significant difference between and or. So, in the original, there is this tiny word, ve, in Hebrew, and it has multitudes of meaning. It could be and, it could be but, it could be then, or it could be or. So the wording itself is ambiguous. So to translate it as "and it will be the Lord's, and I will sacrifice it," it's a choice by a translator. When you go with the Young's literal translation, he uses the word "or." It will be the Lord's, or I will offer. Another fact, our version says, "offer it." And there is no way in English to say whether it's a feminine or masculine "it," right? Or is there? The original says, the word in the original is in masculine. So it would not be proper, but I will offer him as a sacrifice. I hope you begin to get that there is something interesting happening here. Jephthah gives 2 vows. Depending on who appears in the gates, whom he sees first when he comes victorious, it could be dedicated to the Lord, he, she, it, could be whatever it says, right? It will be the Lord's, or I will offer it as a sacrifice. And he's not stupid. He knows that his wife could come, his daughter could come, an animal could come, right? So he gives two options. This is extremely important to understand. His vow is not one, but two. It will be either the Lord's, or I will give him as a sacrifice. Not her, him, okay? Another fact, Judges 11:30. And it says, and Jephthah made a vow. Now, the word vow is also very significant because in the original there are different words for it. And this one happens to be neder, Hebrew word neder, which is translated as vow. Let me give you one example of how this word is used in the Bible. It's the book of Leviticus, chapter 27, verse 1 through 5. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the people of Israel and say to them, if anyone makes a special vow to the Lord involving the valuation of persons, then the valuation of a male from 20 years old up to 60 years old shall be 50 shekels of silver, according to the shekel of the sanctuary. If the person is a female, the valuation shall be 30 shekels. If the person is from 5 years old up to 20 years old, the valuation shall be for a male 20 shekels and for a female 10 shekels. What is it about? What does it mean, evaluation? A person makes a vow to dedicate someone to the Lord. Again, let me read. If anyone makes a special vow to the Lord involving evaluation of persons. So I dedicate my son to the Lord, for example. If God does this, my son will be the Lord's. What does it mean? Depending on his age, I will give this sum of money. That's it. 1 month to 5 years, and so forth. Whether it's a female or male, this is what the word neder means in relation to dedicating people to God. Let's imagine that Jephthah didn't think it through and he really made a foolish vow. That he really did say, I will offer my daughter as a sacrifice. Though he didn't say that. I will offer him as a sacrifice. And him is obviously, an animal, right? But let's suppose that he did make a foolish vow. Was there a way to deal with the issue? The answer is yes. Yes, Leviticus chapter 5, verses 4 through 6. Or if anyone utters with his lips a rash oath to do evil or to do good, any sort of rash oath that people swear, and it is hidden from him, when he comes to know it, and he realizes his guilt in any of these, when he realizes his guilt in any of these and confesses the sin he has committed, he shall bring to the Lord as his compensation for the sin that he has committed a female from the flock, a lamb or a goat for a sin offering, and the priest shall make atonement for him for his sin. So people sometimes swear foolishly, and they say, I will give half of my income to God through the end of my life. And when he or she is making millions, it's okay. But when now there is only Social Security, and you promised half, you are in big trouble. The Lord knew that people are prone to making foolish commitments. So he says, if you realize this, you didn't know it beforehand, but now you do, there was a way out. There was a sacrifice, and a person would be free from the vow. So even if Jephthah did say, I will offer my daughter as a sacrifice, he had a way out, provided by the law of God. Another fact, Judges 11:37. So she said to her father, "Let this thing be done for me. Leave me alone 2 months, that I may go up and down on the mountains and weep for" what? Not my life. You see, she is not mourning for the upcoming loss of her life. She is mourning her virginity. Why? The last fact, Judges 11:40. And the daughters of, no, the next to last, 31, verse 39. And at the end of the 2 months, she returned to her father, who did with her according to his vow that he had made. And what happened? She never got married. So here you have it. The vow was that she'll be celibate. And that's what she was lamenting. As a girl growing up, she imagined her wedding day, having a husband, having a home, having kids, and so forth. And now, and it's important to note that she made this choice. She said, "You uttered words, you do what you said. Dedicate me to the Lord. I will be the Lord's, not my husband's, not my children's," and so forth. So the essence was that she became celibate. She did not marry. The last thing, verse 40, that the daughters of Israel went year by year to lament the daughter of Jephthah. Lament is a totally different verb that's used to describe what she was doing for 2 months. The verb in the original is tana. Let's read in Judges 5:11 and see how it's translated there. To the sound of musicians at the watering place, there they repeat the righteous triumphs of the Lord, the righteous triumphs of his villages in Israel. Did you get where is the tana hiding? Repeat. So what did they do? What is being described in this verse, in this passage? You have musicians. It's chapter number 5. It's the song of Deborah and Barak. It's a song. It's a celebration. It's not lamenting. It's celebrating. It's glorifying. It's praising. Praising that she was so dedicated to God that she gave up her personal life, her family life, her role as a mother, as a wife, to be totally dedicated to God. So nowhere else does this verb is used or translated to lament. It's just not there. So, did Jephthah kill his daughter and burn her as a burnt offering? No, he never promised that, and he never did that. Unfortunately, this is one of the places that we had to deal with because there are popular opinions and because the text does need studying or looking into and not just glancing over to be able to get the message. But again, the main message is not about Jephthah's vow. It's about him and the fact that God was able to use him. That's God's story for today. Amen.